G'day everyone, welcome to Talking Leadership. This is Eric Perez welcoming you to the first of what I am calling Talking Leadership, the global editions. And under this podcast series, I'm going to be talking to leaders and entrepreneurs from around the globe. And I'm very much appreciative of my inaugural guest on this podcast. So by way of background, my guest today is the co-founder of Leader.Team, and I will ask him to expand on what he does in that organization. So can I welcome to the podcast, Cory Miller. How are you, mate?
Thanks, Eric. Really well. It's kind of verging on night time here, but I think it's your morning, right?
Yeah, it's 7:25 in the morning, but that's okay. I'll do what I need to do to get these conversations going. So you're at the end of your work day there?
Yes, sir. It's a Friday and getting ready for the weekend in isolation and quarantine, as you are.
I always stop to say, where are you going to go for your weekend? But apparently that'll be indoors of all things. So, Cory, by way of introduction, can you give the listeners a bit of a background to what you do with Leader.Team at the moment?
Yeah, so right now, Leader.Team, I've got a co-founder, Jeff Mazier, longtime friend, both entrepreneurs. And the biggest part of what we do right now is small group coaching for managers and leaders. And so right now we've got 5 groups going every month. We meet for 90 minutes once a month with those leaders and managers and talk through successes they've had in the last 30 days and challenges they have for the next 30 days. And that comes out of Jeff and I actually met through a small group experience called Entrepreneurs Organization, a forum, almost 10 years ago. And so we take some of the same principles that have helped us grow as leaders, husbands, people in the world, entrepreneurs, and help leaders learn and grow together. So that's part of what we do. We have a couple of different offerings from Cadence, which is like strategic planning and helping your team move forward, and other things at Leader.Team.
That's a good segue into my first theme that I'd like to ask you about. What was your pathway to becoming an entrepreneur?
It's a little bit lifelong goal and a little bit serendipitous luck and opportunity. In 2006, I started a WordPress blog for the industry I was in at the time. And this weird thing happened. I started trying to learn, web design. And so I put a free theme out in WordPress, if you're familiar with that. And a theme is just the design of your website, basically a template. So I put it out and this weird thing happened. I started getting emails and people hitting my contact form saying, will you design my blog or will you design my website for you? So that quickly turned into a freelance web design business where at one point I was making more from my freelance side than I was my day job as a kind of a communications director, public relations officer. And so I knew I wasn't very good at doing that, couldn't do that full time, but this bug had kind of reactivated in me. I had and have 2 grandfathers that were both entrepreneurs. They had never called themselves entrepreneurs, but they both at one time employed every one of their kids. They've got 4 kids each. So all my aunts and uncles and my mom and dad. And so I was working with my grandfather who does the motorcycle shop and said one time, hey, I want to be a businessman. And he goes, no, Cory, you should go to work for someone else and get a pension. Now, in the United States, a pension is something you have to Google. That doesn't really exist much here. And I'm sure in Australia too. But so it was funny because my entrepreneurial grandfathers, who I very much admired, told me to go work for someone else. And I did that for a long time. Had a job from 16 till, I was around 31, 32, 33, somewhere in there when I started the business called iThemes. And man, so that whole freelance business kind of turned into this opportunity to roll out commercial or premium WordPress themes for the WordPress ecosystem. And this was I rolled out that business in January 1st, 2008, rode that wave and had such a blast over 11 years. In 2018, sold it to a company called Liquid web hosting company. And then last January 2019, left the company and the team to start my next chapter. So I love being an entrepreneur. I'm still an entrepreneur. I've got a couple of projects I spin. The thing I'm most proud about is the people I got to work with. And we built software at iThemes, but I really feel like what I did over 10 years, 11 years was build people. Put people, leverage their strengths, put them in situations where they can have autonomy and do their best and feel purpose in the world. And so that was a little bit about my background as an entrepreneur. So I'm kind of starting again. I've got a couple of different projects right now, but I love this thing called entrepreneurship.
Yeah, for those listening, and you won't be able to see the video, obviously, you can just see it on your face that this is something that does drive you, Cory. So one thing I'd like to unpack, because you've said it when you were talking about Leader.Team, that you and your partner train in that business, train other leaders in other businesses. Now, do you see a difference in your experience as an entrepreneur between leaders and entrepreneurs? Is there a distinction between those two groups in your mind? And if so, what does that look like?
I do. I think there is a difference, and they're just labels, but they're kind of separate labels. So you can be an entrepreneur or a business person. Like my grandfathers I told you about, they would never have labeled themselves as an entrepreneur. They thought they just owned a business. In fact, the one grandfather I told you about encouraged me to go work for someone else. His passion in life was not business. He was a cop before he started his first business and eventually his second. They ran for 45 years before he sold it. The same year I sold my company, by the way. He told him, I said, he went a lot longer than I did. But he would never call himself an entrepreneur. But that's one thing. I think there's a difference. You can own a business or you can be an entrepreneur. And the other, the leader. So you can be a business owner and a leader, can be an entrepreneur and a leader. Just like that, there's a toggle. There's managers and leaders. There's people that happen to supervise leaders or people, other people. And I think there's a difference between someone that happens to have people that they supervise or, under them, quote, and people that are leaders. So yes, I think there is a difference, but they're not mutually exclusive. You can have both. And that's what I tried to be and do as an entrepreneur and founder of iThemes, and now continuing out, is be both. I feel both are high callings in life and have high purposes in the world.
That's an incredibly nuanced response, and we could go for a long time talking about what that means. And I can tell just in the way that you've unpacked that, what that means to you. But let me ask another question, and brought it up in the way that you've responded to these, is that you think there's a mystique around entrepreneurship, versus leadership, that there's a veneer of entrepreneurs are at a different level or a different group than your average leader out there in the community. And why I ask this is that if you look at the textbook definitions around what entrepreneurship is, it's typically around the attainment of money as a goal as part of that process of being entrepreneurial. When I would stretch that definition to say, if you're leading a not-for-profit group and it's all volunteers, or you set up a volunteer type organization and the people that work for you aren't there necessarily for an economic payoff, that you can still have entrepreneurship and be entrepreneurial without necessarily hitting a financial mark.
Yeah, let's see if I can unpack that for a second in my beliefs, my personal belief system and experience. I think you can be entrepreneurial and not be a leader. Most entrepreneurs I know don't think of themselves as leaders. They think of themselves as building the business. So from the entrepreneurial standpoint, I don't know if most think about themselves that way, but there are some that are incredible. There's incredible people that don't think of themselves as a leader, but are entrepreneurs. But I think the very best are the ones that embrace both roles. One, entrepreneur, creating something out of nothing, creating a solution that makes people's lives awesome in the world. This whole capitalist system that we're in, or whatever you want to call it, the fact that we can put a solution out into the world. Someone right now is working on a vaccine or some kind of treatment or something for COVID. And I hope they get rewarded by money. I don't think they should take advantage of it once they figure out what it is. But I think there is some business out there, multiple businesses out there right now doing that and putting the solution out in the world that makes people's lives better. That to me is the essence of entrepreneurship. Now, leadership is specific, I think, to people, helping move people progress, help make progress with people. The way the world works is understanding who humans are, how we're motivated and driven. And so that's why I say it's labels, separate labels with toggles. You know, somebody can just say, I own a business and not be an entrepreneur and not think about it like that. They just want to do the work of the, you know, like the classic example is a woodworker. They just want to build awesome furniture. That's it, you know, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that.
Some previous podcasts I've done, I spoke to an entrepreneur here in Australia. She works out of South Australia, and she is in the workplace health and safety field. And she spoke to me about being a incidental or accidental entrepreneur. And when I spoke to her, when I reached out to do the podcast, and again, I'm not about labeling people. I'm just, for the sake of me putting something up for people to listen to, I've got to label it something. And until I spoke with her, she hadn't given it a lot of thought whether she was a leader or an entrepreneur or something in the middle or a hybrid of the two. And to me, in some senses, and I'll put all my cards on the deck here, I'm an early career researcher. To me, this matters a little bit because what's in a name matters to some people and it doesn't to others. And it depends on the field in which you work. So it obviously sounds in the industries that you've been in, making that distinction isn't the biggest deal. It's more about how do you get to the outcome that you're getting to, and that makes eminent sense to me. And I'm very interested in the notion of you take your people with you. You don't work through your people, and you made that correction and distinction quite clear. But let me ask you this, Cory, what's the most difficult part in your journey about being an entrepreneur?
I want to answer that amazing question, but I want to go back to something real quick. It dawned on me that there is a big commonality between leaders and entrepreneurs. And in my mind, at the highest level, when you reach the peak of being the best leader, the best entrepreneur you can be, it is all about one thing, and they both have in common, which is people. And where they become, where those labels or titles or whatever get really poisoned and saddened and, you know, like just bad, is when we forget that it's all about people. As leaders, if you don't treat your people like humans with trust and respect, then you're not leading, you're coercing, you're bulldozing. In entrepreneurship, if you're doing it just for the profit, and by the way, I think entrepreneurship has a simple definition and formula: purpose and profit. We need both. We have too long given away, abdicated the purpose role to nonprofits that you mentioned earlier. I believe the highest calling of an entrepreneur is to do both profit and purpose. And that means people, making people's lives awesome. So, okay, now to your question. Your question was the hardest part about entrepreneurship?
Yeah, for you, the most difficult part about being an entrepreneur, and this one, although it sounds like a no-brainer type question, I think it's important to ask for a number of reasons, including and again, I've been learning as I've gone along on this journey as well. When I've spoken to leaders that don't necessarily see themselves as entrepreneurs, they said some of the difficulties of leadership is the sense of being alone, or that ultimately all of the responsibility rests with you, and that can play around with your mind to the point where you lose sleep and you're worried about the business not for your ends, but because you've got people relying on you. And so just teasing this out amongst your cadre of entrepreneurs around the world now, given that this is the first one of these two, ask that question: do you see some difficulties in being an entrepreneur?
Absolutely. And you nailed it. I was thinking it's the loneliest job I've ever had in my life. It is the most difficult job I've ever had in my life, except for, I should say, parenting. I'm a failure every day, I feel like, as a parent. But the loneliness of both, if you say leadership or entrepreneurship, both lonely. It's tough leading. It's tough building businesses and leading teams because you do hold, most of us kind of shoulder everything. We think we're got to be the fixers and hold everything together. And then oftentimes we're privy to information that we know affects people and can't share that. You know, just from the simple thing of like legally we can't share that, or ethically we can't share something, the decisions that we make. So it is a dangerous, occupational, hazardous job, whether you call it entrepreneurship or leadership. They're both highly dangerous to our mental health because and I talk to leaders and I talk to entrepreneurs all the time. So much frustration. And, our job is often to help our team let off some steam, listen to them, help make sure they feel autonomous in what they're doing, that they're mastering something, that they feel purpose in the world and what the work that they're doing, they're contributing to something. And I always ask leaders, who's doing that for you?
Yeah.
Same thing with entrepreneurs. Part of your thing is like to give a high five to your team when they release a new software product like I did, or make a new sale or something. Who gives you the high five and the pat on the back? And for a ton of like in entrepreneurship in particular, and I would say leadership has these qualities too. I say my parents don't know really what I do. They don't understand my role. My parents were not entrepreneurs. My mom worked with me for 6 years, but they truly didn't understand it, and nothing wrong with it at all. This is the career path I chose for myself and love it and embrace it. But when you're talking to people, particularly entrepreneurship, when I sold my business, I didn't, I couldn't just shout from the mountaintop. I just got, a college degree. I couldn't share. There's a financial part of that, right? That most people don't understand. There's a lifestyle I was able to live for 11 plus years that most people don't understand. I didn't have vacation. I took time off when I wanted to, but I still got phone calls at 2 a.m. as you suggested, with, bad stuff that happened. So yeah, it's a very, very lonely sport, whether you're a leader in an organization of any size or an entrepreneur building your business.
It's quite heartening to hear that in your travels, when you have to explain what you do to other people, that it's difficult to get some people's heads around what it is that you do in that space. And I use people that work in advocacy. So I work in an advocacy role for an industry here in Queensland, in Australia. And when people ask me to explain my job, because it's about talking to politicians, writing submissions, talking to members, it gets really complicated. I say I get paid to think about some stuff every day and I write about it, and that's my job. And people still look at you glassy-eyed going, yeah, that doesn't make sense to me. People want to hear doctor, lawyer, builder, something that they can get their heads around and understand what that means. So I exactly get where you're coming from. And look, Cory, I'd like to segue into something that is a more positive side of that, the difficulty of being an entrepreneur, and talking about measurement of success. Now, when I thought about this theme, and I've asked this in a different way to leaders in other podcasts, it's not necessarily the metric of what your KPI is, but I have some sense that you flagged what a measure of success is for you, and I'm sure you're going to bring it up, but I'm not going to say it myself. But is it multiple things that you measure as success, or is there one overriding measure of success for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Success for me is defined as how many people I've reached and improved their lives in life. And why I love entrepreneurship is I can do that on scale. At iThemes, we served, I don't know, tens of thousands of customers over 10 plus years. And the stories I would get at conferences, like people would come up to me and say, your work, your things at iThemes changed my life. I was a truck driver and now I'm a web designer. I'll do that every single day. The rewards in seeing my people, my team, I've got I think he's 34 now. He was my right-hand person. He was my chief operating officer. When I left, he took over, no doubt about it. It was like, that was not even a question. He's killing it. Seeing Matt grow, seeing Matt lead over 10 years. I mean, the money was good. Don't get me wrong. I like the money. I don't want to give the money away. But man, the people, those are the things I savor forever. So lives change. Absolutely. And it's not a second career for me because I've had like 35 careers, but I feel like, but in this, it was always been about purpose, but it's almost been like, I don't like to weight them, but if there was purpose and profit, like you have to have profit in the business, you have to make money. We have to keep these lights on. But in the second career, I find myself just resetting every single time to purpose. How am I using my time and talent, my experience, my expertise to areas I'm very interested in and changing people's lives, even if they never know my name. And so when I set out last year is mental health. I said, I don't know where it goes, mental health, but that's one of the areas. I held in my hand and said, this is the thing that's not going away. I care about this. And it's taken me a year and 3-4 months now, and I'm working with an addiction treatment center in Nashville, helping them take all of their programs online, do a lot of the stuff I built my business with over 10 plus years. And I'm loving it. I'm working my butt off, but I'm loving it because I set out with first a purpose in mind. And so absolutely, I think, and we skew it when we forget, the equation has two parts, purpose and profit. If we just leave profit in there, we could really easily dip into greed. And we've seen some of the grievous things that have happened because of that.
I'm interested in leadership in general around things like strategic thinking as a core leader capability. I bring no preconceptions or notions about what key entrepreneurial capabilities are. So again, from your travels, what would you say are the key capabilities that an entrepreneur needs to have to be effective? Because success is measured in different ways. I don't want to go that way. More about, if you're going to be an effective entrepreneur, what do you need in that toolkit?
And by the way, if my kids do not, I have two children, 5 and 7, if they don't become entrepreneurs, I'm totally fine. I want them to find their place in the world, the way to contribute and to do it. But I want them to have the answer to this question. I want them to have entrepreneurial capabilities, an entrepreneurial way of thinking, because I think it's what is going to be vital for them in their lifetime to have. And that's number one, is the ability to adapt. Across the globe currently, every person on this planet, I'm trying to think in my head who may not have to adapt, but are currently having to adapt in big ways. The ability to pivot, to adapt to new situations is so much a part of the entrepreneurial capability. And by the way, I don't think it's hard for me to say a list, but I will say, the ability to adapt, the ability to see solutions and problems, the ability to see hope and opportunity, even in the darkness. Right now, there's a lot of entrepreneurs suffering and hurting right now because this has so severely affected the economy and their business, and even aside from all the tremendous health effects. And they have to see a way through this. They have to find hope. They have to find the light in the dark. And that's something we have to have our eyes open, not closed. I want to say resilience, but I'll tell you what, I don't know if I'm resilient. I think I'm resilient and sometimes just naive, but I want to say, perseverance or something like that. But the ability to endure the situation that you happen to go through in life, let alone an entrepreneur. But I wouldn't say I've walked through as healthy as I could, for sure. But I think I go back to the ability to, there's two parts. One is to adapt and then see ways through when everybody else only sees chaos and ruin. And that's a part of it. You got to keep seeing the hope. You got to keep seeing the light. And so in this new, it's funny. It's not funny. It's ironic. The whole COVID thing has, affected everybody on the planet, right? And people have asked me dozens of times about it. And I go, as a business person, as an entrepreneur, and I say, I don't see all gloom and doom, but I know, it's not just my problem though. It's everybody's problem. We have to all try to figure out how to get through this together. But I kind of relate to, I started over, I left the only job that I loved, ever, that I found the job that just kept me enthralled for 11, 12 years, whatever it was, 11 years. And so I had to start over again. I had to go, okay, this is off the table, the iThemes software and WordPress kind of thing. What am I going to do now? And so I guess I've been in this space of, having not everything taken away from me. I'm not ever going to say that, but in a space of starting again and knowing how hard it is. And so, but that's what we do. We set out and try to find the way through. That's what we do as entrepreneurs. Again, we could unpack this stuff for a long time, mate. But what interests me there about your response is the following. So I've got some statements that come to mind that segue nicely into what you just said before, and I'd like to get your perspective on them if I could, Cory. So the first one is, entrepreneurs are risk takers. I'm going to say from my experience, I don't know if I'm a risk taker more than anybody else, but my perspective is different. In fact, I would say I'm mostly risk adverse. And some of the best entrepreneurs I've been friends with, been blessed to be friends with for so long, would be not even close to a risk taker. They want to minimize risk, right, and then find the way. So I think we get labeled as risk takers and mavericks because we do things by and large the rest of the population don't. But I go, there's as much risk as having a job and thinking this corporation will employ you for 20 years. I have more control on what I do.
Yep.
I'm not leaving. I leave as least as possible up to other people's control and risk as possible. So I don't know what my agree or disagree statement is, but that's my story.
This is good being the inaugural podcast. About maybe I need to tweak these statements a little bit. But what you got to the nub of, and thank you for that. But what I think you got to the nub of is that for people like me that would never go down the pathway you've gone, because I'm not built or think that way, and that's fine. I mean, we all work to our strengths. That I see entrepreneurs, and the first thing that jumps in my mind is these crazy kids. They go out and take all these risks. But then when you gave me that response, I'm like, no, they're actually trying to minimize their risks to get the outcomes that they want without risking everything on the table. But look at it, and I've, for those listening, if you could see Cory's face right now, this is gold. For me, it's for those watching from the outside, looking at people that run their own businesses and aren't in some ways a slave to a paycheck. That to me is inherently risky because and look, if you'd asked me this 20 years ago, I would have been, yep, so what, give it a shot. I've got kids now. I'm in a different stage of my life, and I think one thing that's not often talked about is, I think entrepreneurs, when you've got different things that are at stake and you've got family versus when you don't, or when you're a lot older and you are an empty nester and you don't have other people in your family relying on you, I think your appetite for risk changes depending on your stage of life. Does that ring true for you?
Oh, yeah. When I started iThemes, I was married, but I had no kids. I had a house payment. That's it. Now, when I left a very good job with very good benefits a year and 4 months ago or so, I left a lot of money on the table too. And now I've got 2 kids, and, my wife works and is awesome in her career and everything she does. She's also an entrepreneur, by the way. But it was different. It was different. And I know friends, this didn't happen with me, but who started their business while their wives or spouses were pregnant. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So I want to answer that risk taker thing to maybe.
Yep, fine. Yeah, that's fine. There is no right answers here, just questions. Entrepreneurs are persistent.
Okay. I love this question. I tell a lot of people I'm a quitter. I've quit so many things in my life. When I found the part that I didn't like, that I was miserable, I quit. My wife and I have this struggle. She's an achiever. She loves, checking. She wants to win. She wants to get 100 on the quiz and complete every task every day. And I'm like, we struggle with this parenting thing because I'm like, should they be miserable for a time when they crossed the point that they should quit? Because I've quit so many things, Eric, over the years. But then I persisted too. So I want to say maybe to this one, I persisted when, we were in Europe heading to a conference, Matt and I, my right-hand guy, and we're having this great dinner with our support lead. And I get this message, and it says, we've been hacked. Everything just fell out of me. I was just like, we don't have a business. It's not going to be there when I get back. I went to catastrophe mode. And I look back at some of the things that could have gone so wrong and think somehow I kept putting one foot in front of the next. So maybe call it naive, maybe call it perspective of just, I don't know. I loved what I do. I loved who I did it with and did it for and still do. And so persistent, I think I persisted when I needed to or had to, but I'm also a quitter about so many different things. And I'm thankful I'm a quitter. I would have ended up in these paths way down the path and been miserable through it. So maybe.
We'll call it strategic persistence, hey? Knowing when and not to. Yeah, that makes some sense to me. Entrepreneurs are innovators.
Absolutely. The best are innovators. And I'm not saying the name that always gets thrown around is Steve Jobs, so I just invoked Steve Jobs. But yes, entrepreneurs are innovators. They see solutions when others just see problems. We invent cures. we invent solutions to people's problems. We invent things that make people's lives better. So absolutely, the best of us are innovators.
Entrepreneurs are strategic thinkers.
Absolutely. We like to play chess. We now the problem we can get into is if we play chess with human beings. We should never do that. Competitively, market-wise, customer-wise, making sure we have the best products and insulating our businesses for the long term by creating like competitive moats and doing the best we can by our customers where they know us and it would cry if we left, if they couldn't find us again. We are strategic thinkers, and the best of us play chess really, really well.
Okay, and the final one, Cory, and this one I'd be interested to get your thoughts on, because I think you've alluded to this one, but just didn't use the terminology. Entrepreneurs use foresight. So you're thinking about what the possible futures might look like.
Yes, and I think in terms of, and I'm trying to think of all the entrepreneurs I know, yeah, the best see a better life for the people they serve in some way, shape, or form. My buddy Chris, he owns a construction business. Man, there's no one like him. Like, he cares. He truly cares. He cares about the quality. He cares about the people. He's an amazing relationship builder. And then Dima, who has another construction business, does it totally different. But they all think about how they can make into the future, how someone gets transformed through what they do. It might be a very narrow of their life, but they think about the future. And that goes, I think, back also to strategic thinkers. The best are the ones that are able to last as long as you can. I played chess. I tried to predict where the future would come. And this great thing, I think it's either Peter Drucker or Abraham Lincoln says it, the best way to predict the future is to create it. And if you live by that as an entrepreneur or a leader too, it means, I'm going to use another quote, Wayne Gretzky, he says the success wasn't that he went to where he thought the puck would be. That's what entrepreneurs and the best leaders do, is they see the future. They fast forward the movie and think ahead for people. Whatever that is, if it's their team, if there's their customers or leaders, if there's constituents, the best of us think about the better future we can create together now. Start building it now. Put the pieces together. So yes, absolutely.
Brilliant. Cory, almost to the end of the podcast, but I won't go away without asking you about the next theme, and this one's around mentoring. Now, this came up, and it wasn't an intention of mine through the podcasting, that every leader that I've spoken to had mentioned someone in their career or their pathway to being leaders that either mentored them in a formal sense, but more often than not as being an informal process where mentoring in some aspects has also been your peer network. So for those that you rely on to bounce ideas off, I can see that and could define that as a mentoring network. Just because they're peers doesn't necessarily mean they can't be a mentor in the strict definition. So from an entrepreneurial point of view, have you engaged in the mentoring process, or has it not been part of that journey to get to where you've gotten to?
I have definitely leaned into the mentoring and the coaching aspect of being an entrepreneurial leader. Absolutely. I think I probably hesitate a little bit to say entrepreneurs you can't be an entrepreneur if you're not mentoring. I think about some brilliant people that aren't able to mentor in a way, to coach. I think it's some genius level people I've met in my life that probably really struggle on the social spectrum to have a mentoring relationship properly. So I think that's probably a little bit of my hesitancy. However, leaders absolutely should be coaches and mentors. That's the best brand of leadership right there. It's not command and control like we talked about earlier. It's building people. Build people, connect them to purpose, show them how they can contribute, push them a little bit past their where they think they can go or do, challenge them just enough to be better, to realize something about themselves. The best leaders, the best entrepreneurs too, I would say, wholeheartedly around or round about, are mentors for sure. I hesitate to say every entrepreneur has to be a mentor. I think they should take care of people first and foremost, for sure. I don't know if that should be a requirement, but it was me. I love those opportunities that opened up. to
Yeah,
mentor us.
and to just to clarify, no, I wasn't. I should have pitched that a little differently. Not that it's a requirement for either leaders or mentors. Just that process being part of the vista of what you've done. So, in your experiences as you came up, would you have seen your grandfathers and your father as mentors in that journey to be entrepreneurial in some ways?
They were mentors without realizing it.
Sure,
I was,
sure.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
absolutely. I think, and it's funny because, the one said, no, you should go have a job, and he just didn't realize it. And I remember I left actually church work, the ministry, to start the business. And for years, he would still introduce me as, in that former life. And, and I'd be like, Papa, I'm, I'm the founder of a company. I'm the CEO. I believe I'm a shepherd, by the way. That's the brand of leadership and entrepreneurship I wanted and tried to do. But I was not a pastor like he saw me doing for a long, long time.
Sure.
And so yeah, they that's another thing is finding ways to learn when you don't think the circumstance, someone's not intentional about it. There's ways to do that for sure. So osmosis through observation, absolutely. I'm always curious too.
Yeah, and that's the thank you for making that link. I think the mentoring process is just another way to learn your trade, a craft, or get into a particular field by being able to. I'm injecting some of my own experience here. I became, I think, a better leader, or sorry, let me backtrack, a more effective leader in what I did by learning from others and just asking some very basic questions. Because I think in my travels, what I've been able to see from significantly better leaders than myself, and I'm quite happy to say that openly, is that if you're not still on the journey and if you can't put some ego aside and say, yeah, there's people do this better than you, but if you want to get better yourself, you need to learn from those that do that, is to ask even the dumbest question. There is no dumb question. Not asking the question is dumber than asking a dumb question, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does.
And so, yeah, I think the pitching of mentoring as a process of learning is an interesting one. So, Cory, final question, and I know you've probably given this one some thoughts, but I'm really keen to find out what you think. Are entrepreneurs born or made?
Oh man, that's such a good one. I think made. I don't know the full answer. I don't want to say born, honestly. I have a predisposition not to say made. I'm sorry, born. I have a definite bias to say made. I think about some of my childhood experiences, my adolescent experiences, even through college and my 20s. And I go, man, they formed some stuff that was already maybe in me, but I've seen so many great entrepreneurs that are so different from me. And so I think made, they're forged.
Oh, okay. In this thing we call a life of leading and a life of taking some what would you say, calculated risks. Look, Cory, I appreciate your time and thank you for what is a very interesting insight into what it means to be an entrepreneur. Again, I come to this particular topic from the leadership perspective, very much being a learner on how you guys do what you do. And for those of us not in that headspace, it's an interesting world that you live in, and to some extent, and I'll be the first one to put my hand up. There's always this veneer of a major difference between those that take a paycheck and work full time to those that are in that entrepreneurial space. And from what you've discussed, I think the differences are more marginal than people think about. It's how much planning do you put into it and how much risk are you willing to get out of the system. And I think COVID-19 has proven that maybe it's just as risky taking a full-time paycheck as it is being an entrepreneur. Does that ring true for you, mate?
It's going to be so interesting how we adapt as a human race, through this and what comes out of it. And I think one, like you just said, that could come out of it is people deciding to, out of some of the ashes of what might get destroyed or severely diminished, come some really amazing things. And I shouldn't say might. There will become amazing things out of it. And I hope part of it is a next generation of entrepreneurs.
Excellent. On that positive note, I've been talking to Cory Miller. Thank you for your time, mate.
Thank you, Eric.